Lieutenant Commander Valon thought he knew everything about running a starship. Fresh from the Galactic Naval Academy with honors in strategic command theory and interspecies relations, he strutted aboard the GFS Meridian like he owned the damn thing. What he didn't know, and what nobody bothered to warn him about, was that mocking Captain Julia Kane in front of her cubs was roughly equivalent to poking a sleeping void dragon with a sharp stick. I'm Quell Murtok, Chief Medical Officer aboard the Meridian, and I've spent the last 4 years documenting the fascinating dynamics between humans and their adopted alien younglings. What happened during Valon's first week aboard our ship wasn't just military drama. It was a lesson in why you should never, ever underestimate the bonds that form between human females and anything small enough to trigger their protective instincts. Captain Kane had been commanding the Meridian for 3 years, turning what should have been a routine patrol vessel into something approaching legend status. Her crew included the usual mix of species you'd expect on a galactic Navy ship, plus 8 predator cubs whose parents had died in various conflicts. The cubs ranged in age from 6 to 12 in their species equivalent years, and they'd basically claimed Kane as their pack leader through a process that defied both military regulations and common sense. The trouble started during Valon's first staff meeting. Kane was reviewing patrol assignments when the cubs decided to check on their human. They had this habit of appearing whenever Kane was dealing with what they perceived as potential threats, which apparently included new officers who hadn't proven themselves worthy of respect. Captain, Valon interrupted, as a small Nexari female named Pip peeked around the conference room door. Are we really going to conduct military briefings with children present? Kane paused, her green eyes taking on that particular quality that anyone with functioning survival instincts would recognize as a warning. They're not children, Commander. They're crew members. Crew members? Valon's laugh had the sharp edge of someone who'd never learned when to shut up. Captain, with all due respect, these are alien juveniles playing at being soldiers. This isn't a daycare center. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Around the conference table, seasoned officers suddenly found their datapads extremely interesting. Even Threx, our normally chatty Coran communications officer, went silent. Little Pip, all of 3 feet tall and maybe 40 pounds of pure Nexari predator, stepped fully into the room. Her compound eyes fixed on Valon with the kind of focus that her species typically reserved for hunting prey. Daycare center, she repeated slowly, her universal translator giving her words a deceptively innocent tone. Is that what you think we are, new officer? Valon made his second mistake of the day. He smirked. I think you're children who belong in classrooms, not on military vessels, he said, apparently under the impression that he was being both reasonable and authoritative. What happened next was like watching a carefully choreographed dance of impending doom. Pip walked over to where Captain Kane sat, climbed up onto the chair next to her, and placed one small clawed paw directly on Kane's command insignia. The gesture was unmistakably possessive, claiming ownership in a way that transcended species barriers. Ours, she said simply. The single word carried enough territorial threat to make a Terran grizzly bear nervous. But Valon, bless his academic heart, interpreted it as cute rather than dangerous. How adorable, he said, his condescending tone suggesting that watching paint dry would be more intellectually stimulating. The little one thinks she can claim the captain. That's when the rest of the cubs arrived. Brix, the young Thraxian male whose chitinous plates were just starting to develop their adult coloration, appeared in the doorway with the silent grace that made his species such effective hunters. Behind him came Sage, a human girl whose parents had died defending a mining colony. Then Kido, a Vakari male whose bioluminescent patches were flickering in patterns that anyone familiar with his species would recognize as extreme agitation. Within 30 seconds, all 8 cubs had arranged themselves around Captain Kane's chair, in what military tacticians would call a defensive formation. What xenobiologists would call it was a pack protecting their alpha. Commander Valon, Kane said with the kind of calm that preceded either spectacular violence or spectacular stupidity. Perhaps you'd like to reconsider your assessment. But Valon was apparently committed to his course of action with the determination of a lemming approaching a cliff. Captain, I understand you've grown attached to these refugees. but allowing them to interfere with military operations is unprofessional at best, dangerous at worst. I'm recommending immediate transfer to appropriate civilian facilities." The silence that followed was so complete that you could have heard a pin drop in the ship's engine room 3 decks down. Kane stood slowly, her movement causing the Cubs to adjust their positions with the fluid coordination of a trained unit. "Commander, you've been aboard this ship for exactly 72 hours. In that time, you've managed to insult my crew, question my judgment, and demonstrate a complete lack of understanding about how this vessel operates. Captain, I'm simply applying standard military protocols." "Standard protocols," interrupted Brix, his mandibles clicking with what sounded like amusement. "Don't account for the fact that we've participated in 14 major operations over the past 3 years. Valon blinked. "Participated how?" Sage stepped forward, her young face serious beyond her years. "Intelligence gathering, mostly. Turns out adults will say all kinds of interesting things around kids they think are harmless. Plus tactical analysis," added Keto, his bioluminescent patches now pulsing in steady blue patterns. "Vakari naturally see in 17 different spectrums. I can spot cloaked ships that your sensors miss completely." Pip's compound eyes glittered with predatory satisfaction. "And psychological warfare. Amazing how unsettling it is for enemy commanders when something small and cute starts asking uncomfortable questions." The color was slowly draining from Valon's face as he began to realize that he might have misjudged the situation. Unfortunately, he wasn't quite ready to admit it. "That's highly irregular," he managed. "Irregular, maybe," Kane replied. "But effective. These Cubs have been responsible for the successful completion of more missions than half the officers in the fleet." "Cubs," Valon repeated, apparently fixated on the terminology. "Yes, Cubs," said a new voice from the doorway. Commander Rex Thorne, Kane's executive officer, entered with the kind of expression that suggested he'd been listening to the conversation and found it educational. "Would you prefer junior tactical specialists? Auxiliary crew members? Small beings who could probably outmaneuver you in a strategy simulation?" Valon's jaw tightened. "Commander Thorne, surely you don't approve of this arrangement?" Thorne looked at the Cubs, who were still maintaining their protective formation around Kane, then back at Valon. "Commander, last month these children identified a Khazari infiltration plot that our intelligence division had missed completely. The month before that, young Pip here talked a terrorist out of detonating a fusion bomb by convincing him she was lost and scared." "She's Nexari," Brix added helpfully. "We don't really do scared." Pip's mandibles stretched in what her species considered a smile. "But humans think we're adorable when we act frightened. Very useful for tactical deception." The meeting room had devolved into what could generously be called an educational experience for the new lieutenant commander. Unfortunately, Valon seemed determined to view it as a challenge to his authority rather than an opportunity to learn. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," he said, his voice rising with what sounded like genuine outrage. "These creatures are being trained as spies and manipulators. It's unethical, it's dangerous, and it's completely against regulations." The Cubs exchanged glances with the kind of wordless communication that comes from living and working together as a functional pack. Then they looked at Captain Kane. "Captain," Sage said formally, "requesting permission to demonstrate our operational capabilities to Lieutenant Commander Valon." Kane considered this request with the expression of someone weighing multiple unpleasant possibilities. "What kind of demonstration?" "Nothing harmful," Keto assured her, his bioluminescent patches now cycling through what I recognized as Vakari amusement patterns. "Just educational." "Define educational," Kane replied, apparently having learned to be specific when dealing with requests from beings whose idea of fun involved outsmarting enemy spies. "Well," Brix said, his chitinous plates clicking as he shifted position, "the new commander seems to think we're helpless children who need protection. Perhaps we could show him what helpless children are capable of." The predatory gleam in 8 pairs of eyes was enough to make me grateful that I wasn't the target of their attention. Valon, however, seemed to interpret their interest as confirmation of his assessment. "Exactly," he said triumphantly. They're plotting against a superior officer. This is what happens when military discipline breaks down. Commander Thorne's expression suggested that he was rapidly losing patience with the new officer's complete inability to read social cues. Commander Valon, they're not plotting against you. They're trying to educate you. There's a difference. A significant difference, Kane added. When they plot against people, those people tend to end up in medical bay or brig. Sometimes both. I could confirm this from personal experience, having treated several visiting officers who'd made the mistake of underestimating the Cubs' capabilities. Nothing permanently damaging, of course, but definitely educational. Valon, however, seemed to take Kane's statement as evidence of poor leadership, rather than accurate assessment of her crew's abilities. Captain Kane, I'm beginning to think that your attachment to these aliens has compromised your judgment. Perhaps it would be best if I assumed command responsibilities until a proper review can be conducted. The silence that followed this statement was so profound that I'm pretty sure it achieved consciousness and started writing poetry. Kane's expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted slightly. The Cubs responded immediately, their formation tightening around her chair with the precision of a well-trained military unit. Commander, Kane said quietly, you've just suggested relieving a captain of command on her own ship, in front of her crew, based on your 72-hour assessment of a situation you clearly don't understand. I'm suggesting that someone needs to restore proper military order to this vessel, Valon replied, apparently convinced that doubling down on his position was the correct tactical choice. That's when little Pip made her move. She climbed down from the chair, walked over to where Valon stood, and looked up at him with those enormous compound eyes that could see in spectrums human vision couldn't even imagine. New officer, she said in that deceptively sweet voice that her translator gave her. You want to take our human away from us. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact delivered with the kind of calm certainty that predators use, right before they strike. Valon looked down at the small Nexari, and for the first time since boarding the ship, seemed to realize that he might have misjudged something important. I'm not taking anyone away, he said, his voice carrying just a hint of uncertainty. I'm simply suggesting that proper protocols. Protocols? Pip repeated thoughtfully. Yes, we know about protocols. Would you like us to demonstrate some of them? The other Cubs had begun moving with the subtle coordination that comes from years of working together. Nothing threatening exactly, but definitely purposeful. Captain Kane is ours, Sage said simply, taking a position near the room's main door. We claimed her. She accepted the claim, and that makes her pack. Pack bonds, Brix added, moving to cover the secondary exit, are sacred among predator species. Breaking them is considered an act of war. Quito's bioluminescent patches were now pulsing in synchronized patterns with the room's lighting systems, creating an almost hypnotic effect. In Vakari culture, threatening pack structure results in immediate and overwhelming retaliation. Commander Thorne watched this display with the expression of someone who'd seen it before and found it educational. Commander Valon, I'd suggest very carefully considering your next words. But Valon, apparently determined to learn things the hard way, chose to view the Cubs' positioning as confirmation of his theories rather than warning of impending consequences. This is exactly what I mean, he said, his voice now carrying genuine anger. These creatures are threatening a superior officer. Captain Kane, if you can't control your pets, then someone else needs to. He never got to finish the sentence. What happened next wasn't violence, exactly. It was more like a very educational physics demonstration involving leverage, momentum, and the surprising effectiveness of coordinated teamwork. Within 15 seconds, Lieutenant Commander Hrix Valon found himself sitting on the conference room floor, completely unharmed but thoroughly immobilized by 8 small beings who had just demonstrated that size and age had very little to do with tactical effectiveness. Well, Kane said mildly, I suppose that answers the question about whether they can take care of themselves. Valon looked up at her from his position on the floor, his expression cycling through confusion, embarrassment, and what might have been the beginning of understanding. How did they? He started to ask. Practice, Pip replied cheerfully. Lots and lots of practice. Practice, Pip replied cheerfully. Lots and lots of practice. Valon attempted to move and discovered that the cubs had somehow arranged themselves so that any motion he made would result in him falling over in a different direction. It was like being trapped by a living puzzle that breathed and occasionally made encouraging comments. The beauty of multi-species teamwork, Brix explained, conversationally, his mandibles clicking with what sounded suspiciously like laughter, is that we each contribute different strengths. I provide the structural engineering, Pip handles tactical coordination, Sage manages human psychology, and Keto. I make sure nobody gets seriously hurt, Keto finished, his bioluminescent patches now cycling through gentle healing frequencies that were actually making Valon feel more relaxed, despite his predicament. Commander Thorne pulled out his datapad and began recording. For the official report, Commander Valon initiated an unauthorized demonstration of subdual techniques by junior crew members. Results: highly educational for all involved parties. This is mutiny, Valon protested, though his voice lacked the conviction it had carried earlier. Actually, said a new voice from the doorway, this is Tuesday. Admiral Petra Kane, Julia's aunt and the commanding officer of the entire Third Fleet, entered the conference room with the kind of timing that suggested she'd been listening to the whole conversation through the ship's internal communications. The cubs immediately shifted their positions, maintaining their hold on Valon, while somehow managing to snap to attention simultaneously. It was a display of discipline that would have impressed drill sergeants across the galaxy. Admiral on deck, Sage announced formally, proving that despite their unconventional methods, they understood military protocol perfectly well. Admiral Kane surveyed the scene with the expression of someone who'd seen this particular educational demonstration before. Captain, would you care to explain why my newest officer is currently being held prisoner by what my reports describe as non-regulation crew members? They're demonstrating the difference between helpless children and trained operatives, Kane replied calmly. Commander Valon requested clarification on their status. I see. Admiral Kane looked down at Valon with the kind of neutral expression that experienced officers recognized as far more dangerous than anger. And what has the commander learned from this demonstration? Valon opened his mouth to reply, then closed it again as he realized that any answer he gave would essentially be an admission that he'd been outmaneuvered by beings a quarter his size and age. Permission to speak freely, Admiral, Pip said sweetly. Granted. The new officer called us children and suggested we belong in daycare centers. He also recommended our immediate transfer to civilian facilities because we're dangerous to military operations. Admiral Kane's eyebrows rose slightly. Did he now? Yes, ma'am. Then he tried to relieve Captain Kane of command because her attachment to us had compromised her judgment. Fascinating. The Admiral walked over to where Valon was still immobilized and knelt down so they were at eye level. Commander, in your professional opinion, are these cubs currently demonstrating the behavior of helpless children or trained operatives? Valon's face went through several interesting color changes before he managed to answer. Trained operatives, Admiral. And would you say that Captain Kane's leadership style has produced effective results in terms of crew performance and mission accomplishment? Yes, Admiral. Then perhaps, Admiral Kane said with the kind of gentle patience that somehow made her words more terrifying than shouting, you might reconsider your assessment of both the situation and your commanding officer. The cubs released Valon with the same coordinated precision they'd used to capture him. He stood up slowly, brushing off his uniform and trying to salvage what remained of his dignity. Admiral, I apologize for my hasty judgment, he said formally. I clearly misunderstood the operational parameters of this vessel. Oh, you haven't seen anything yet, Sage said helpfully. Wait until we hit our next port of call. Pip's got this amazing routine where she pretends to be lost and scared while gathering intelligence on smuggling operations. And Brix can hack into communication systems while pretending to play children's games, Keto added, his patches now glowing with what I recognized as Vakari pride. Don't forget the time you infiltrated that weapons dealer's compound by convincing them you were buying presents for your younger siblings, Brix reminded him. Admiral Kane listened to this casual discussion of what amounted to advanced espionage operations with the expression of someone who'd heard similar reports in official briefings. The Cubs, she said to Valon, have been instrumental in breaking up 3 major smuggling rings, identifying 2 spy networks, and preventing 1 attempted assassination of a planetary governor. Their success rate is actually higher than most adult intelligence operatives. But Valon started, then stopped, as he realized that finishing the sentence with children would probably result in another educational demonstration. Young, Admiral Kane finished helpfully. Yes, they are. They're also brilliant, loyal, and absolutely lethal when protecting someone they care about. Which brings us to the real issue here. She gestured toward where Kane stood, watching the exchange with the calm alertness of someone ready to intervene if necessary. Commander Valon, these Cubs didn't just choose Captain Kane as their commanding officer. They claimed her as pack family. Do you understand the difference? Valon's expression suggested that he was beginning to, but wasn't entirely comfortable with the implications. Pack bonds, Admiral Kane continued, override military hierarchy in predator species. Captain Kane isn't just their superior officer. She's their chosen alpha, their protector, their family. Threatening that bond is equivalent to declaring war on their entire social structure. Which, Pip added cheerfully, we take very seriously. Very, very seriously, Brixie confirmed. Commander Thorne cleared his throat. Admiral, if I may, Commander Valon's initial assessment wasn't entirely unreasonable. Most military vessels don't operate with this kind of unconventional crew structure. True, Admiral Kane agreed. Most military vessels also don't achieve a 97% mission success rate while maintaining 0 casualties among civilian populations. She activated her datapad and projected the Meridian's operational statistics for the past 3 years. The numbers were, frankly, impossible to argue with. Gentlemen, the Cubs aren't passengers or pets. They're the most effective intelligence and psychological warfare unit in the fleet. They just happen to be young enough to trigger protective instincts in humans and most other species, making them perfect for operations where adult operatives would be detected immediately, Kane added. Who suspects children of being trained spies? Apparently not Commander Valon, Sage observed dryly. The new officer's face was now cycling through shades of red that suggested he was processing some very uncomfortable realizations about his own competence. Admiral, he said carefully, I believe I owe both Captain Kane and her crew a significant apology. You do, Admiral Kane agreed. But more importantly, you owe them your respect. These Cubs have earned their place on this ship through blood, sweat, and more tactical brilliance than most officers demonstrate in their entire careers. Plus, Pip added, climbing back up onto Kane's chair and resuming her possessive position next to the captain's insignia, we're really good at making people underestimate us. It's one of our best tactical advantages. The fact that most beings see children when they look at us, Keto explained, means they reveal information and plans they would never share with adult operatives. And when things go wrong, Brix's mandibles clicked ominously. Nobody expects tiny predators to be capable of serious retaliation. Admiral Kane nodded approvingly. Which brings us to your new assignment, Commander Valon. Valon straightened, clearly preparing himself for what he assumed would be a transfer to some unpleasant posting as punishment for his spectacular misjudgment. You'll be remaining aboard the Meridian as Captain Kane's new tactical officer, Admiral Kane announced. Your first assignment will be working with the Cubs to develop new protocols for intelligence-gathering operations. The silence that followed this announcement was broken by what sounded suspiciously like muffled laughter from several of the Cubs. Admiral, Valon said carefully, are you certain that's wise? Commander, you just received a masterclass in tactical thinking from beings you dismissed as helpless children. I'd say working with them is exactly what you need to develop some humility and practical skills. Kane spoke for the first time since the Admiral's arrival. Commander Valon, are you willing to learn from your mistakes? Yes, Captain. Good. Because your first lesson starts now. Kane gestured to the Cubs, who were still arranged around her chair like a living demonstration of pack loyalty. These aren't my subordinates. They're my family. And I'm theirs. That relationship doesn't conflict with military discipline. It enhances it. How so? Valon asked, apparently having learned that admitting ignorance was safer than pretending knowledge. Because, Sage explained patiently, when you care about someone enough to claim them as pack, you'll do anything to protect them, including becoming the best possible version of yourself. Captain Kane teaches us strategy, tactics, and leadership, Brix added. We teach her about thinking outside conventional parameters and using unconventional advantages. Plus, Pip's compound eyes glittered with predatory satisfaction. We're really good at identifying threats to our pack before they become serious problems. The implications of this statement weren't lost on anyone in the room. Valon had just learned that his assessment of Kane hadn't just been wrong, it had been interpreted as a potential threat by beings whose protective instincts were hardwired at the genetic level. The Cubs, Admiral Kane said, clearly enjoying the educational value of the moment, have an interesting perspective on leadership. They judge commanders not by rank or credentials, but by results and character. And humans who protect Cubs, Keto added, his bioluminescent patches now pulsing in patterns that convey deep contentment, earn loyalty that transcends species boundaries. Commander Thorne pulled up another set of statistics on his datapad. Commander Valon, crew turnover on vessels with traditional command structure averages 32% annually. Crew turnover on the Meridian is 0. 0, Valon repeated. Nobody leaves, Kane confirmed. Once you become part of this pack, you stay part of this pack. Unless, Pip added helpfully, you prove yourself unworthy of trust. Then we find creative ways to encourage your transfer to more appropriate positions. Creative ways? Valon asked, apparently having learned to be specific when dealing with beings whose idea of creativity involved tactical deception and psychological warfare. Educational demonstrations, Brix explained. Similar to what you just experienced, but usually more comprehensive. Admiral Kane checked her chronometer. I need to return to my flagship, but I'll be expecting regular reports on Commander Valon's integration into your pack structure, Captain. Of course, Admiral. And Commander. Admiral Kane fixed Valon with a stare that could have melted hull plating. I trust there won't be any further suggestions about relieving Captain Kane of command or transferring her Cubs to civilian facilities. No, Admiral. Absolutely not. Excellent. Admiral Kane headed toward the door, then paused. One final note, Commander. The Cubs chose Captain Kane as their alpha, but pack structures are hierarchical. If something ever happened to her, they'd choose a new alpha from among the crew. Yes, Admiral. Just remember that when you're working with them. They're evaluating everyone all the time, determining who's worthy of pack membership and who might qualify for leadership roles. After the Admiral left, the conference room fell into a thoughtful silence. Valon looked around at the Cubs, who were now watching him with the kind of careful attention that suggested they were indeed evaluating his potential for pack membership. So, he said finally, what happens now? Kane smiled, and for the first time since he'd boarded the ship, it wasn't the kind of expression that made him nervous. Now you learn why the most effective military units in the galaxy aren't built on hierarchy and protocol, she said. They're built on trust, loyalty, and the absolute certainty that your packmates will always have your back. Pip looked up at Valon with those enormous compound eyes and extended one small, clawed paw. Welcome to the pack, new officer, she said formally. Try not to disappoint us. As Valon shook the tiny paw, I made a note in my medical logs that humans and their adopted predator cubs had once again demonstrated that the most powerful force in the galaxy wasn't technology or firepower. It was family. 2 weeks later, I was reviewing the fascinating behavioral changes in our newest crew member when the ship's emergency klaxons began wailing. The Meridian had detected a distress signal from a civilian transport under attack by Ravager pirates in the nearby Kepler system. All hands to battle stations, Kane's voice echoed through the ship's communication system. This is not a drill. I made my way to the bridge, arriving just as the tactical display showed 3 Ravager vessels surrounding a badly damaged passenger liner. The pirates were known for their brutal efficiency, taking what they wanted and spacing the survivors. Captain, Commander Thorne reported from his station. The transport has approximately 200 passengers, mostly families returning from the outer colonies. ETA to intercept? Kane asked, her fingers already dancing across her command console. 18 minutes at maximum velocity, came the reply from navigation. The transport won't last 18 minutes, Valon observed from his new tactical station. Over the past 2 weeks, he'd thrown himself into learning the ship's unconventional operating procedures with the dedication of someone trying to prove himself worthy of pack membership. That's when the Cubs appeared on the bridge, moving with the purposeful coordination that had become their trademark. They took positions at auxiliary stations that had been specially modified for their smaller statures, accessing systems with the familiarity of longtime crew members. "Captain," Pip announced, her compound eyes reflecting data, streams from multiple displays. "I'm reading energy signatures consistent with Ravager slaving operations. They're not just looting the transport, they're harvesting the passengers." Kane's expression hardened. "Options? Standard approach puts us in range of their weapons before we can effectively engage," Valon reported, his tactical training finally finding practical application. 3-to-1 odds against us if we go in directly. "Unless," Brix interjected, his mandibles clicking as he processed information at superhuman speed, "we use the asteroid field to our advantage." The young Thraxian activated a holographic display showing the complex gravitational interactions between the Kepler system's asteroid belt and the ongoing battle. "If we approach from Vector 77 Mark IV, he continued, highlighting a path through the floating debris, "we can use the asteroid's gravitational shadows to mask our approach until we're within optimal firing range. That trajectory requires precision flying that's beyond normal navigation parameters," Thorne pointed out. "One miscalculation and we become part of the asteroid field permanently." "Not a problem," Sage announced confidently. "Keto can see gravitational fields directly. He'll guide us through." I watched as the young Vicari's bioluminescent patches shifted to deep blue patterns, indicating that he was processing sensory data invisible to most species. His natural ability to perceive energy fluctuations made him the perfect navigator for impossible maneuvers. "Captain," Valon said slowly, "they're proposing a tactical approach that violates at least 6 different safety protocols." 7, Kane corrected with a slight smile. "But it'll work." "How can you be certain?" "Because," Pip explained patiently, "we've done this kind of thing before. Remember the Khazari smugglers last month? Same principle, different application." The Cubs began working with the fluid coordination that came from years of practice. Brix calculated trajectory adjustments, Keto monitored gravitational fluctuations, Pip coordinated communication intercepts to track enemy movements, and Sage analyzed the psychological profiles of Ravager commanders to predict their tactical responses. "Initiating approach," Kane announced. "All hands, prepare for combat maneuvering." What followed was 15 minutes of the most insane flying I'd ever experienced. The Meridian threaded through asteroid fields at velocities that made my medical training scream warnings about inertial damage, guided by a young Vicari, whose enhanced perception allowed him to see paths that didn't exist on any navigation computer. "Ravager vessels are adjusting position," Valon reported. "They've detected our approach." "Too late," Pip announced with predatory satisfaction. "We're already inside their defensive perimeter." The Meridian erupted from the asteroid field like a hunting predator striking from ambush. Kane's tactical coordination, enhanced by the Cubs' real-time analysis, turned what should have been a suicidal assault into a masterpiece of precision warfare. The first Ravager vessel never knew what hit it. The second managed to return fire before Brix's calculated targeting solutions reduced it to expanding plasma. The third attempted to flee, only to discover that Sage had anticipated their escape route and positioned the Meridian perfectly to cut them off. "All enemy vessels neutralized," Thorne reported. "Transport is secure." As the rescue operation proceeded, I noticed Valon watching the Cubs with an expression of amazed respect. They had just demonstrated tactical coordination that would have impressed fleet admirals, working with their human captain like components of a perfectly tuned machine. "I've never seen anything like that," he admitted to me quietly. "Few people have," I replied. "That's why they're so effective. They don't just follow orders. They anticipate needs. During the post-mission debriefing, Valon surprised everyone by formally requesting to implement the Cubs' tactical innovations in the ship's official protocols. Their methods should be documented and distributed to other vessels, he argued. This kind of coordination could revolutionize fleet operations. Kane looked at the Cubs, who were clustered around their stations like a council of war, despite their youth. "What do you think?" she asked them. "Could be useful," Pip mused. "But only if commanders understand that these aren't just tactical procedures. They're pack dynamics translated into military operations." "Most officers," Keto added, his patches cycling through thoughtful patterns, "aren't ready to accept that effective leadership sometimes means following the lead of beings smaller than themselves." Brix's mandibles clicked with amusement. "Plus, it takes time to develop the kind of trust necessary for this level of coordination. You can't just order pack bonds into existence." "True," Kane agreed. "But we can start teaching the principles. Commander Valon, I'm putting you in charge of developing a training program based on what you've learned here." "Me?" Valon looked genuinely surprised. "You arrived thinking you understood military command," Sage observed. "Then you learned that real leadership has nothing to do with rank and everything to do with earning the right to be followed. That makes you the perfect person to teach others the same lesson." 6 months later, the Meridian Method was being taught at naval academies throughout Allied space, not as a rigid doctrine, but as a philosophy of adaptive leadership that emphasized trust, communication, and the recognition that wisdom could come from unexpected sources. And at the center of it all, a human captain and her pack of predator cubs continued to demonstrate that the strongest military units weren't built on protocol and hierarchy, but on the simple recognition that family bonds could transcend any barrier the galaxy might throw at them.